Hello, and welcome back to another Weekly Wisdom. Every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., CNetwork wants to bring you diversity, equity, and inclusion tips that you can take to make your workplace culture more inclusive for all of your employees. And we are excited about today's topic because it's one that a lot of folks have been talking about this year. And my goal is to give it to you or to give you some thoughts on this particular topic in 10 minutes or less, which is what we do with all of our weekly wisdoms on Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. So let's jump into today's topic, which is 3 ways DEI is changing in 2024. Now, we've all heard or seen the headlines and some of what folks have been saying this year around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that it has become a politicized topic and that a lot of folks have shared concerns about the direction diversity, equity, and inclusion has gone. Now, my initial thoughts before sharing the 3 ways the space is changing in 2024, my initial thoughts generally are that after being in diversity, equity, and inclusion for 12 going on 13 years, we've seen a lot of changes in this space. We've seen a lot of changes in how people feel about it, in how much attention it gets, both positive and negative. And we've seen a lot of changes in terms of what people call it or are willing to call it. All of those things are natural when it comes to different elements of running and leading a business or leading people. And this space that we're in, from my opinion, based off of my perspective, is a natural place to be after the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2020 within corporate spaces. So my general sense is that though there is a lot of conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we might see it evolve, generally that evolution is part of the experience of leading companies, leading teams, and it's on us as practitioners to figure out how best to evolve with this space while recognizing that it is so important, such important work, that we can evolve with it while also ensuring that the kernel of ensuring that all people feel and can be seen within their workplaces, that kernel remains intact. So with that, I said we'd do this in less than 10 minutes. Let's talk about 3 ways DEI is changing in 2024. So one of the initial ways we've seen some changes emerge is in the emphasis that's being put on inclusion and belonging and investing in culture as much as possible. Let's be clear about this. Inclusion and belonging have always been central parts of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, ensuring that everyone feels seen and supported, that workplace cultures are effective so that they can generate productive business outcomes is a huge part of what DEI is. We're just seeing more of a laser focus on that messaging and on the initiatives that actually bring forth inclusive workplace cultures. And so what we might find is that there is less of an emphasis on some of the broader policy changes that used to be front and center, and more of an emphasis on how we can see the outcomes of creating a more inclusive workplace culture sooner rather than later. The next thing we are absolutely seeing within this context is that DEI and employee engagement professionals are building closer relationships with internal counsel and legal teams. A lot of what we've seen in 2024 has to do with extra, perhaps, focus on the legal space and how there have been challenges to certain approaches within corporate spaces, and the fact that legal teams are very keen and aware of these things. And there is a need to build a collaborative connection between the legal teams that exist within organizations and the DEI leaders that are leading the initiatives that ensure that everyone feels seen within an organization. Now, I have been working with legal teams and lawyers, employment lawyers especially, my entire career. It is absolutely essential that we ensure that we are following the legal parameters around how to support employees. And as there are some interesting changes in things that have been held up in court, it's important that that relationship remains intact. We've just seen a lot more of that sharpen over this past year or so, the last 5 months of the year or so. And so that is absolutely one way we've seen DEI change slightly. Another thing that we've been seeing evolve over the last few years, but definitely sharpen this year in 2024, is that metrics are becoming more of an imperative. So while perhaps in 2020 and 2021, we saw organizations really throw lots of initiatives into the fire, meaning they were trying a lot of different things to support diversity, equity, and inclusion within their workplaces, we are seeing a more measured approach. And I mean that pun intentionally. We're seeing that if folks are going to invest in initiatives related to creating an inclusive environment, organizations want to make sure that they're able to measure the outcomes of those initiatives. Now, again, this is something we've seen evolving and sharpening over several years, but it's becoming front and center now in 2024 as challenges have arisen. There's a need to really make sure that we're looking at how these initiatives truly affect how employees feel and truly affect the bottom line. And that's ultimately a good thing. Each of the changes we're seeing within the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it's the idea of focusing really deeply on inclusion and belonging, or working really closely with the legal teams within our organizations, or even becoming more metrics focused, each of these trends that we're seeing are only working to help diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders and those who support good leadership, those who support the effective workplace practices that create strong workplace cultures. All of these things are just going to help with making this space even better. Again, it's been an interesting year, and it is an interesting time for those of us who spend time thinking about creating engaging and supportive workplace cultures. But I'm optimistic that this is both part of the natural course of how things sometimes evolve, and that we are moving in the direction toward ensuring that the kernel of this work remains intact while we shift and shape what needs to be shifted and shaped to make it a more effective part of any business or organization or industry landscape. Now, if you want to talk more about how to support your inclusive workplace or how to support your leaders as they become more inclusive leaders, you can do that by reaching out to us and setting up a consultation. You can find us at cnetwork.com/consultation. You can also find us online. We are here on YouTube, on LinkedIn. We are on Instagram, and you can also sign up for our newsletter for more information about how you can create a more inclusive work environment. And I will see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Eastern for the next Weekly Wisdom. Thanks, everyone.